that has the ability to take up that mantle, not like him and Dr. Ruckman. Well, she's not really in the Bible believing circuit, you know. She's not. So, and she's not young either. So, it's a shame. I wish I could be the man to pick up that mantle. But when Sam Gipp is going to be down in Port St. Lucie, this guy is an evangelist. His name's Sam Gipp. Sam Gipp, he's an evangelist. He's going to be down in the Port St. Lucie church here in the next couple weeks. So if you've never had the opportunity to hear him preach, you're missing something, because he's fun to listen to, and he is incredibly intelligent, and he knows the book inside and out. So yeah, I'll find those dates for you guys if any of you guys want to come down. I know it starts in the afternoon. It's like on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, kind of like we did. So I think it's like 6:30 every night. So, but I'll find out those dates and times if you guys want to go see them. So, all right, we're in John chapter 1. John chapter 1. I think we ended in verse 9. I think we're going to pick it up in verse 10. Am I right? Am I wrong? Is that about right? Verse 9 and 10. All right. So verse 10 recaps some things in verse 9, and before that, it talks about the light, and that's we kind of stuck on that one for a little while about God being the light, and we ran a lot of verses talking about all those things about the light, that which was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. Right? And we talked about the conscience. All man has a conscience. All man knows right from wrong. All that light is given to every man, right? Even without having knowledge of Jesus Christ, right? And we talked about how the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Now, I don't know if we talked about that on Wednesday night or Sunday night, but I think it was on Wednesday night we actually talked about that. But that's true of everything. I mean, you can't look at the creation and not see God. And if you can look at creation and see something other than God, that means you've been educated out of that, right? Because there's no way we're all here by accident, right? There's light given to every man. We should be able to look at something and see that was obviously made by a divine creator, right? We can't do the whole sun, moon, and stars things by accident, right? It just doesn't happen, right? This whole eclipse thing that's going on, that doesn't happen by accident. It's so predictable. That's not by accident. That's not chaos, right? Chaos comes from chaos. Chaos doesn't come from order, right? So randomization doesn't come from order. Random things don't come from order. Chaos causes more chaos. Chaos doesn't cause order. So when we have a natural order to things, that's not a chaotic, that's not an erratic thing. That's not something that just randomly happened, right? It can't be that way. But in verse 10, it says, and he was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. So we have three events that happen in this same verse. We have the incarnation, he was in the world, right? Then we have the creation, the world was made by him. We already talked about that pretty extensively at the beginning of John chapter 1, so we're not really going to go into that. But we know that he created all things, right? He was the conduit which through all things were created. Right? God may have been the creator, but he was the conduit through all things. He was the one who did everything, right? And then you have the spiritual blindness. You have the spiritual blindness of Israel, and the world knew him not, right? It's not just Israel, but it applies to Israel. It applies to the partial blindness of Israel, because they're the ones that rejected him. But it's not just about Israel, no.
That's the next verse.
Correct.
It says the world knew him not. I think of the science community now.
Well, it says he came unto his own, and the world knew him not, right? Right? You're actually, okay, I'll see that. That's the nation of Israel. That's verse 11, right? So the world knew him not, and then verse 11, the partial blindness of Israel, right? Okay, so let's just take verse 10. That's not the blindness of Israel. That's the blindness of us. That's just a spiritual blindness. Those are people who are saying, I can't look at creation and see God. Right? That's them who are saying, God doesn't exist. Right? A fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Right? Because every man is born with that creation, the sense of a creator, right? Every man is born with an inward knowledge that God exists, right? Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning God. It doesn't say in the beginning there was a God. It just says in the beginning God, right? It doesn't say in the beginning someone created God. It doesn't say you know what it does with God? The Bible takes the existence of God from before eternity and after eternity, from everlasting to everlasting. It just takes it for granted. It doesn't even address the issue. It just says in the beginning God. He was there. When did he get there? What do you mean? That's an irrelevant question. He was there. Well, when? Where? Those questions don't make any sense in the realm of God. Right? Because you have three things. You have, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, you have, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? So all existence, as we know, is something called time, space, and matter, right? That's what we know. Time, we know space, and we know matter. In the beginning, there's time. God created the heavens, there's the space, and the earth, there's the matter. You can't have one without the other. You can't have two without the third. You can't have one without the other two. You have to have time, space, and matter all at the same time. Otherwise, nothing works. You can't have time, because if there's no place nothing to pass the time or calculate, it doesn't make any sense. It's just, you can't have space if you don't. You can't have matter if you don't have a space to put it, and you can't have time you can't have space without time. You just can't have all three of them. You can't have them. They have to come into existence at the exact same time, space, and matter. Otherwise, when would you put the earth then? If there was the earth but no time, when would you put it? If there was no space, where would you put it? Right? If there was no earth, what are you putting when and where? They all have to come into existence at the same time. And in the beginning, you have a trinity of trinities there, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, time, space, and matter. God, Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost. You have a trinity of trinity and trinity, right? So this spiritual blindness, that's the creation, and that spiritual blindness, that is caused by Satan, right? That is caused by Satan, and you can turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and we can see how he does it. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Second Corinthians chapter 4, verses 14 and 15. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 14 says, knowing that he which raised up the Lord Jesus shall raise up us also by Jesus, and he shall present us with you. For all things are in your sakes. That's not the verse that I was looking for. 4:4? Okay, I put 14. Okay, my bad. 2 Corinthians 4. Well, let's talk about 3 too. But if our gospel be hid, it is hid to them that are lost, in whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not. Right? So where does that spiritual blindness come from? Where does that atheist who say there is no God, where does that come from?
It's natural.
That comes from the devil. It says it right here, right? It says it right.
Like in 1 Corinthians, the natural man.
Receiveth not the things, right? Yes, the natural man, right? They blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. For we preach not ourselves, but we preach Jesus the Lord, and ourselves your servant for Jesus' sake. Right? So that spiritual blindness, that concept that there is no God because I just don't believe there's a God, that's not a man-made thing. That's a satanic influence. Right? That is the satanic influence on our education system that causes that. Right? Because now, they teach it in school as a matter of fact that evolution and the Big Bang happened. Right? They don't teach it as a theory. And that's exactly what it is. It's a theory. Right? They call it the theory of evolution. Right? Because there's no proof to it. There's no substance to it yet. It's a theory. Right? And if they're honest, an honest person would have to admit, an honest scientist who believes in evolution has to admit that it is a theory because there is no hard fact evidence of it. And they'll say, well, we have the fossil record. That is a blanket statement to try to get you to shut up. Challenge that. When they say we have the fossil record, and when you say, what record shows one animal turning into another species? They can't do it. It doesn't exist, right? So, I mean, and when they say evolution, take it back all the way to the back, all the way to the back. Where did this come from? Where did this come from? Where did this come from? Where did that come from? Where did that come from? And they'll say we all turned, well, if they're honest, they'll all come back and say, well, we all came from pond scum. Single cells, single cell amoebas, single celled organisms, right? If you really want to ask them, where did that single cell come from? Where did the first spark of life come from? They can't answer it. They'll just say it happened when gases and things and all got together in a happy little accident. What?
Big Bang.
And a big bang, right? It's just some happy little accident happened, and then all of a sudden, we're the only life in the entire universe.
Well, they're caught, because if you stop to think about it, we believe in the Big Bang theory. God said, let there be light. Bang, there it was.
God said bang and it happened, right? Yes.
But when they sit down and they say, well, it was lightning that struck the pond that activated the amino acids that caused the one-cell organism. Okay, smart guy, where'd the lightning come from?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, that's an electrical charge.
Where'd the electrical charge come from?
Oh, it came from the atoms?
Right.
You
Who created the
do
atom?
all that work figuring out how to put a nuclear weapon together, and it's much simpler than that? What are you guys talking about?
So I mean, when they say, well, we have, I mean, it's a logical problem.
Yeah.
It's a logical problem. We have single-celled organisms to this day, right? Do we have two-celled organisms to this day? Do we have three-celled organisms to this day?
3?
Nope. Do we have four-celled organisms? Do we have five-celled organisms? They don't exist. So how can a single-celled organism jump to a monkey? Anyway, didn't mean to get off on evolution. I'm sorry.
It's easier to see how monkeys turned into man.
It's easy to see how monkeys turned into man because there are similarities. Some of us act like animals. I mean, I get it, right? I mean, I get it. But, you know, when they try to make a jawbone of an extinct pig the missing link between Neanderthals and man, okay. You guys know that happened, right? There was.
Take them a full century to discover it.
Yeah, someone found this jawbone, and they're like, "Man, this is it. This is the missing link. This is the fossil record we've been looking for." And they made this whole skeleton out of this jawbone, and they said, "This is it. We got it. We got it." And some guy was walking through the museum. Was it 7 or 8 years later? Was walking through the museum and says, "That's not what that is." And he went to his drawer. He worked at the museum. He went over to his drawer and he pulled out 2 more of them. And he says, "This is the jawbone of an extinct pig." But they had it set up as the missing link. They're trying so hard to try to find it, right? It doesn't compute. But that's the blindness that Satan causes. They're trying so hard to not see God. Oh, I can't see him. He's not right. I don't see him. He's not right in front of me. Right? That's the blindness he's talking. And then it doesn't just relate to us, okay, because verse 11 is directed directly at the nation of Israel. And he came into his own, and his own received him not. Right? That's the blindness of the nation of Israel. That's Matthew chapter 10, Matthew chapter 15, if you want to read them. Matthew chapter 10, verses 5 and 6, Matthew chapter 15, 21 through 24, talks about the blindness, right? They received him not, they rejected him. The ministry of Jesus Christ was peculiar, right? It was primarily to what people? It was primarily to the Jews. It wasn't until a little bit later, that near the tail end of his ministry, that he started to kind of waver from that. But especially the first part of his ministry, it was entirely to the Jews. This continued until the stoning of Stephen. Honestly, it continued all the way until the stoning of Stephen, right? When you look at it, his ministry was primarily to the Jews, and then every once in a while a Gentile would get in on some things. Well, that was not unheard of. Even in the wilderness, if a Gentile were to come into the fold and want to become a Jew, as the Bible says, you take them in, You take the vagabond in, and if he conforms to Judaism, what are you supposed to do? Entreat him as a brother, right? He's a Jew, religiously, not from nationality, right? He is a religious Jew, right? They're Jewish proselyte, right? That's what they proselytized, and they brought him into the Judaic religion, right? So his work was primarily to the Jews, and every once in a while a Gentile would get in. That's not unheard of, right? Even in the Old Testament law, there was provisions for that, right? The woman who came to him and the disciples tried to turn him away. And what did Jesus do? He says, "Woman, you're a dog. Get away from me." And she says, "True, Lord, but doesn't the dog eat from the scraps of the master's table?" And what did he do? He turned around and he says, "Of a truth you speak." Right? And then he looked at his disciples. He said, "Why don't you have faith like that?" And he blessed her. Right? She got in on it. Why? Because of her faith. Right? She was able to come in. Now, his ministry was primarily to the Jews, even to the stoning of Stephen, because in Acts chapter 2, we're not quite to the stoning yet, Acts chapter 2, when everybody gets all this all mixed up, Acts chapter 2, who is Peter talking to? He's talking to all Jews. Repent and be baptized for the remission of sins, right? Well, what was the sin that they had committed? They crucified their Messiah. Right? He was preaching a Jewish baptism. It was an extension of John's baptism, really, right? It's an extension of John the Baptist's baptism, right? In Acts chapter 2, verse 38. He's preaching to the Jews because of their sin in crucifying their Messiah, and he's telling them as a nation and as a people, you need to repent and be baptized, individuals, so that we can get back in on it. Right? Because God can help us still. It's not too late. Right? And then in Acts chapter 7, we see Stephen. Stephen's bawling them out in Acts chapter 6. Right? I mean, he's bawling out the religious leaders in Acts chapter 6. And he's, again, primarily with the Jewish people up until then. It's not until Acts chapter 7 when Stephen dies. What happens in Acts chapter 8? Does anybody know what happens in Acts chapter 8? A Gentile gets saved. But up until Acts chapter 7, it's all Jews. Jesus is standing at the right hand of his Father, and Stephen is preaching at the people who crucified him. And what do? They stone Stephen, and Jesus says, "Okay, I'm done. Let's let the Gentiles in." Now, there will be some people who will preach that the second coming would have happened right there if they would have accepted it. And I don't believe that. Right? I don't believe that. Well, Jesus was standing at the right hand. Yeah, and the next time you see him, he's sitting. Well, that's not proof that he's ready to come back right then. Right? But some people will say that, and more power to you, but I'm not. The cross was always supposed to happen. Right? He must be in a hurry. The cross was always supposed to happen, and it was a fixed point in time. You know why I know that? Because the Bible says, Psalm 22, Isaiah 53, those things are written well before Jesus actually comes, right? So those things are prophesied that was going to happen, right? And it was prophesied that he was going to die and resurrect the third day and come again.
Also, the Jews use the same Bible we do.
The Jews do not use the same Bible that we do, no. They don't use anything in the New Testament. They reject the New Testament completely. So they just use... What's that?
Israel.
So you can get a New Testament in Israel. You can get one, but an Orthodox Jew would never use it, right? Someone who's open to Judeo-Christianity would use it, but an Orthodox Jew, a Jew of Jews, would never use anything in the New Testament.
So do they have the same writings?
They have the same Old Testament books as us. They're just in a different order. They are in a different order. They have this, all the same Old Testament books are the same. Right, but they're like their First and Second Kings and First and Second Chronicles are all two big books, right? But it's the same, right? Actually, they have First Kings and First Chronicles and Second Chronicles and Third Chronicles and Fourth Chronicles, or is it First Kings, Second Kings, Third Kings, Fourth Kings, something like that?
First Samuel, Second Samuel, First Kings, Second Kings. It's the books of the kings.
Okay. Yeah, so they call all First Samuel, Second Samuel, First Chronicles, Second Chronicles, First Kings, Second Kings is all the kings to them, right? Because it's
They don't kind of have them in order like
they don't have them in the same order. We have Malachi as our last book. Their last book is 2 Chronicles. Is it 2 Chronicles? It is, yeah. 2 Chronicles is their last book.
You haven't read one of them?
I have one back there. Yeah, I have one back there. Yeah, I'll let you look at it. I think it's actually in Hebrew. I don't know if it's going to do you any good, but you can look at it, yeah. So I'll have to dig it out. But remind me after, and I'll show it to you.
Well, I think you can get it, whatever.
Yeah, no, I've got it on my bookshelf. It's just a matter of me finding where it's at on the bookshelf. The bookshelf's a mess. I got to
See, I can read it for myself.
Sure, sure.
Torah
Uh-huh.
is the first 5 books.
Yes.
The Pentateuch,
Yep.
to Greek speakers, and we call it the books of Moses.
Uh-huh.
And Tanakh is the entire Old Testament.
Yeah, I have a Tanakh back there.
And the Apocrypha is in Greek, and some of them will accept that, but many of them won't. As a quick aside, we're going through the book of Psalms, and we're going to find an interesting triad. In quite a few Psalms, it'll instruct the people, all Israelites, to bless the Lord. Then it'll say, sons of Levi, bless the Lord. Then it'll say, God-fearers, ye that fear God. And Cornelius.
Acts chapter. Yeah, we're going to talk about him in Acts chapter
He
10.
fears God.
Yep.
And so what you're talking about when you talk about a God-fearer is a Gentile who has allied himself with Jews. They didn't reject them. It's just that you had to behave like a Jew.
Right.
Became a
And
God.
if you came in and tried to bring your gods in, what were they supposed to do with you?
Yes.
Get you out of the camp, right? Israel rejected Christ, so God blinded Israel.
Yeah.
That's it. Romans chapter 11. It says, Romans 11:25, there's a blindness in part, is what it says. Now, what does it mean by in part? It means they're not completely and totally blinded today. Not completely and totally. It looks like it if you look at them, but they're not completely blinded. God set them aside, and He's like, okay, I'm going to deal with everybody, right? I'm going to deal with everybody. I'm not just going to deal with the Jews anymore. I'm going to deal with everybody. So He blinded Israel for their wickedness and for their sin and what they did, their unrepentance, right? He blinded them for their unrepentance and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So when He was done in Acts chapter 7, they stoned Stephen. That was the last straw. Right? Acts chapter 8, what happens? A Gentile gets saved. Acts chapter 10, Cornelius gets saved. Right? So the Gentiles got in on it, right? Because of the rejection of Jesus Christ and because of the blindness in part of Israel. Are we tracking? Does that all make sense? Okay. Verse 12 and 13.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
In 8 and 10, Cornelius, they were God-fearers. They had aligned themselves with the Jews. And getting saved was just accepting who Jesus was.
Correct. Acts chapter 8 is Philip
The Ethiopian,
and the Ethiopian eunuch. That is correct. So the Ethiopian eunuch was maybe a Jewish he came to Israel to worship, so he believed in the Jewish faith, right?
he's a God-fearer.
He's a God-fearer, right? But he's a Gentile, right? But he's converted to Judaism, and then the Ethiopian eunuch gets saved in Acts chapter 8. In Acts chapter 10, the first true Gentile gets saved, Cornelius, right? Well, the Ethiopian eunuch was a Gentile, yeah, by birth, but he was a Jew by faith. So,
We're not real sure about Philip because he
Right.
was a group of 7 guys who all had Greek names.
don't even start with
Wait
that.
a second now. Was he a God-fearer too, or was he a Jew? There's no way to tell.
All right, John chapter 1, verse 12 and 13. John 1, 12 and 13. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. It's a great memory verse, right? Great memory verse. I memorized that. Which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but God. Okay, this is important. Right? This gives clarification on what salvation is, right? If you read through Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right? And you got to John, he spells it out for you, right? You went through Matthew, Mark, Luke, didn't hear anything about salvation, did you? No, because they just have the gospel in it. the account of the crucifixion and everything, right? Especially Matthew. Matthew is primarily, almost all of it, Old Testament doctrine. The Sermon on the Mount, Old Testament. Everything in there is where does Jesus get crucified in Matthew? It's the last chapter, isn't it? Last two chapters. Yeah, the last two chapters, right? And then it wraps it up, right?
Last chapter is the resurrection.
Is the resurrection, right? So there's no account of anything that happened after Jesus Christ died and rose again. So there's no salvation there, not in the salvation that we would think of it, salvation by grace through faith. If you can read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and not get the salvation plan, you can do it, right? You're not getting through the book of John without getting salvation plan. It's not going to happen. He spells it out for you here. But verse 12 tells us what believing entails, right? It tells us what believing, but as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. All right? Right? This is important. This is good stuff, right? The eunuch in Acts chapter 8 is reading Isaiah, right? He's reading Isaiah, and he's talking with Philip, and the eunuch says, what hinders me from getting baptized? It's like verse somewhere 34, 35, 36, something like that, right? Somewhere around there. And he gets his answer in that same kind of, I think it's the next verse. He says, what stops me from getting baptized? And you know what he says? If thou believest with all thine heart, thou mayest. That's what he says. If you believest with all thine heart, thou mayest, right? That is the receiving, right? Believe it with your heart, right? Believing with all your heart. That's what receiving is. That's what he told. That's what Philip told the Ethiopian eunuch. If you believe with all of your heart, there's nothing to stop you from getting baptized. Why? Because you've received him if you believe him with all your heart. Right? That's the receiving. That's the belief with all your heart. Now, everyone who says they believe really doesn't believe. Right? There's a lot of people who say they believe, but they don't really believe. They never received him.
And the devils do.
And the devils believe him. The devils believe he exists, right? There's a difference between believing he exists and believing on him, which is receiving him, right? Believing in his name, believing with all your heart. That's the difference between believing and receiving. Believing does not equal receiving. You'll hear preachers, believing equals receiving. No, it doesn't. The devils believed on him, right? That doesn't equal the same thing. The receiving comes when you believe with all of your heart. This is what he tells Philip. The Ethiopian eunuch. If you believe with all of your heart, there's the pond. Let's go. I'll baptize you right now. Let's dunk it. Right? That's what he does, right? So when someone hears, receives, and believes, they're born again. That's the gospel, right? That's what John's telling you. Look at John chapter 3, verse 3. John chapter 3, verse 3. Jesus answered and said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see into the kingdom of God. So how do you see the kingdom of God? John chapter 1, verse 13. Which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but God. Okay? So he tells you three things that salvation is not, and one thing that salvation is from. Okay? He tells you three things that salvation is not. He tells you in John chapter 1, verse 13, it's a spiritual birth. This is what he told Nicodemus, right? Marvel not that I say unto you that you must be born again. And Nicodemus went, I can't go back into mama. What do you mean, be born again? And he says, I'm not talking about a physical birth, ding-a-ling. I'm talking about a spiritual birth. And this is exactly what he says here in verse 13. He says, not of blood, nor of will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but God. What is God? God is a spirit. And those that must worship him in spirit and truth, right? So it says it's a spiritual thing. It's not of flesh, not of blood, not of your will. You can't will your way to heaven. You can't will yourself into heaven. You can't will yourself to be a better man and get yourself there. That doesn't work. It's not of the blood, right? No, none of my sacrifices can do anything. The blood of bulls and goats cannot take away the sin of the world. Right? I can sacrifice 100 lambs, 1,000 lambs, 1,000,000 lambs, and guess what? It's not enough. Right? Not of the will of the man, not of the will of the flesh, not of the blood, but guess who it's done by? It's God who does it, right? This is why so many who will say they believe really do not, or did not receive, because they made their salvation about the will of man. I'm a good person. I'm going to work my way. I got baptized, right? That's the will of the flesh. That's the will of man. That's not God, right? This is why so many people who say they believe never really have. They believe he exists, but they never received, right? Because they made it about themselves or their will or their work or the blood, right? But they didn't make it about God. Does that make sense? Okay, that's important because you will find people all the time. Everyone in Florida is a Christian. Everyone in Florida is a Christian. You go to church? Yeah, I go to church. Where do you go to church? Oh, I went to church, I've been baptized.
St. Sebastian.
Right? That's what they say. Oh, I got saved. Well, when did you get saved? Oh, I got baptized. And that's not what I asked you. What church do you go to? Oh, I used to go down to the Catholic church down there on the corner back in the day. So what happened back in the day to make you not go to church? Oh, well, no, I still believe in God. Well, good for you. I believe in God too. That doesn't do me any good, just believing in God. What do you believe? So, a lot of people say they believe. A lot of people that say they're going to believe are going to split hell wide open when they die. Because it's not about just believing, it's about the receiving. Right?
It says in verse 39, and when they were come up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord called away Philip, that the eunuch saw him no more.
Yep.
Philip's gone.
Philip's gone.
He went on his way rejoicing.
Yep.
What helped him to rejoice? The Holy Spirit
Right.
of God.
So that's a crazy story. I mean, I'm baptizing somebody. Right? I'm getting baptized, right? Someone dunks me down, and when I come back up, the person who's baptizing me is gone.
And I'm rejoicing.
And what did the Ethiopian eunuch do? Well, praise God! That's weird. I'm running home scared if that happens to me, right? He went home rejoicing. You know what he realized? He realized that man that was sent to him was a man that was sent to him by God. You know, there's a verse that says you can entertain angels unaware. He probably thought it was an angel.
Hebrews.
Right? He probably thought it was an angel. Now, the Ethiopian eunuch didn't have Hebrews at the time, but, the concept still applies. Right? There's things that happen to us all the time. We can entertain angels unawares. Do you guys realize that? Abraham did it. Right? That was the angel of the Lord. And he was unaware until he was made aware. And then he says, Lord, you going over there to Sodom? Yeah, I'm going over there to Sodom. Samson's mom and dad got it too, right? That's right. That's all through the scripture. You find people who entertained angels unaware, right? But anyway, all right, verse 14. Verse 14. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory and the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Okay, so the Word of God is in verse 1, and it was made flesh here. God became a man. We went through this pretty extensively when we hit John chapter 1, verse 1. So I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but I am going to talk a little bit about it, right? He had a human birth in Luke chapter 2, right? Luke chapter 1, verse 34 and 35 was when the Holy Spirit came into them and told them what was going to happen, right? And that he was going to have a child. Mary was going to have a child, and she would have a son, and the Holy Ghost shall come upon thee, right? There was his physical birth. He was a man. That there's no doubt about it. The Word was made flesh. Turn to Acts chapter 13, verse 23. Acts chapter 13, verse 23. Acts 13:23, it says, of this man's seed hath God, according to his promise, raised unto Israel a Savior, Jesus. Now, who is he talking about? Verse 22, he's talking about David. It's David's seed, right? He's of the lineage of David. Now, when you read through one of the, it's either Matthew or Mark, I can't remember which one, where the lineage goes through David, right? And
That's Matthew.
Matthew, right. Right, Matthew the king, right, portrays Jesus Christ as a king, and that goes to the lineage of David. So that's that right there. We understand that that is what he's talking about. But now look at verse 33. God hath fulfilled the same unto us, their children, in that he hath raised up Jesus again, and as also written in the second psalm, thou art my son, and this day have I begotten thee, right? So it talks about this day have I begotten thee. That's the physical birth, right? He was born of the seed of David through in Matthew, right? Only begotten of the Father, though. That's interesting. John chapter 1, verse 14 says, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father. Look at verse 18. No man hath seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, which is in his bosom of the Father, hath declared him, right? John 3:16, we know John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten. 1 John chapter 4. 1 John chapter 4. 1 John chapter 4, verse 9. In this was manifested the love of God towards us, because that God sent his only begotten Son into the world that we might live through him. He is the only begotten Son. He is the only begotten, and we can behold his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, which is what? Full of grace and truth, verse 14, where we're at. Go ahead.
If we stay in 1 John,
Yep.
see in the first verse, he says, which we have heard and which we have seen with our eyes. Well, who is we? We is Peter and his brother James. Oh, well, that matches up perfectly with the Word was made flesh and we beheld his glory.
Right. We beheld his glory. Peter, James, and John. That's the Mount of Transfiguration.
Yeah, these guys were on the mountain.
Yeah.
I mean,
They beheld Christ's glory here on earth. They already saw it,
Yes.
right? They saw that.
Told them it was going to
Yes.
happen a week earlier.
Right. And he told them that was going to happen, and that, I mean, he showed them. I mean, the Mount of Transfiguration, what a miracle. I mean, can you imagine being Peter, James, John? You know the funniest thing about all that? He gets up there. Peter, James, John get up there. They see Moses and Elijah. And it says, it calls them by name, Moses and Elijah. They had a conversation with Moses and Elijah. They saw Jesus Christ transfigured, transformed. He turned around and it was shone so bright, all those things, right? They fell flat on their face. They got to see just an inkling of the glory that we're going to experience when we get to heaven, right? And can you imagine? Can you imagine that? I can't even imagine. I can't wait to see it. But man, I can't even imagine what it would be like to see the shining face of the Lord Jesus Christ. And you know what Jesus told them to do when they got done? Don't tell anybody about it.
Until.
This is why I was never on the Mount of Transfiguration, because I'd have blabbed, right? I'd have spilled my guts the moment I came down the top of that mountain, right? I wouldn't be able to hold it in, right? I get excited about you. I mean, you see me when I preach and I get flustered because I get so excited about some things, right? I couldn't contain it. There'd be no way I'd be busting at the seams. I can't wait. I want to see it. So they're talking about this whole eclipse thing tomorrow, starting the rapture, right? I think they're wrong, but I hope they're right. Right? I mean, they're wrong, but I hope they're right. Because you know what they're using? They're using this. They're saying that the signs in the heaven there are going to be two signs in the heaven. Well, the first sign was the eclipse that went through all these towns called Salem the first time, and Salem means peace or whatever. And now all the towns are going through something called Nazareth or Nineveh or one of them. It's another Bible term. And guess what? Right where the X meets, guess what? There's a town called Rapture there. God means the rapture's coming. Oh, brother. So you have 7 sevens. You have 2 sevens, 7 towns the first time and 7 towns the second time, and right in the middle is the word rapture. That means the rapture's happening tomorrow, guys. No, they're wrong. There's so much more that has to happen, but I hope they're right. I wish they were right, because that means I actually get to experience what Peter, James, and John saw on the Mount. right? And I wouldn't have to hold that in. I wouldn't have to contain that. You know what? On the way down that mountain, Peter, James, and John had better been praying, Lord, give me the strength to not tell anybody about that. I mean, if you love the Lord even this much, you had to have been bursting to not let some of that out. Lord, please don't let me blab that. Please don't let me blab that. Please don't let me blab that until you tell me it's okay. Because he didn't say don't tell anybody ever at all. I mean, we have the account of it. He says don't do it until my time, the appointed time, right? So after the crucifixion happened, Peter, James, and John said, and after the resurrection, they saw him go up, and they're like, wait a minute, that looks familiar. Now's the time, guys. And Peter, James, and John were able to tell the disciples about what they had seen on the mountain, right? And if I was one of those other 10 disciples, 9 disciples, boy, I'd have been mad. I'd be fit to be tied. Why didn't you tell me about it? Well, because the Lord told me not to, right? Yeah, that's crucial information that I needed, right? Right. I mean, I already believe, but man, I need that information, right? So this is so it's the only begotten of the Father, and in verse 18 we read it, right? The Father hath declared him, right? So he's the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Verse 14, full of grace and truth. Let's turn to Romans chapter 5. Romans chapter 5. Verse 15. Romans chapter 5, verse 15. But not as an offense also is the free gift, for if through the offense of one many be dead, much more the grace of God and the gift of grace, which is by one man, Jesus Christ, right? Look at John 17:17. Sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. If we're in the book of John, turn to John chapter 14. I mean, it's all through here. He is full of grace. He is full of truth. John chapter 14, verse 6. John chapter 14, verse 6. We all know this verse. Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Full of grace and truth. He's not just full of grace and truth. He is grace, and he is truth. The Bible is very clear about that. And when we went over the deity of Jesus Christ, I think we covered both grace and truth pretty extensively. He is not only full of grace. He is not only full of truth. He is the physical epitome of grace, and he is the epitome of truth. Sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. Well, what word do we have? This word. Well, wait a minute. The Bible calls Jesus the Word. He is the epitome of truth. He is truth incarnate. He's the only person who's ever lived, who's never told a lie. Right? Any of us never told a lie? Right, let's start from this morning. Any of us never told a lie? Right? Okay, don't answer that. Okay, but so he is the epitome of truth, and he's full of it. I mean, he's just full of grace, full of mercy, full of truth, all of those things, right? All those good things that we can describe, he's full of them. All right, John chapter 15. John chapter 1, verse 15. There's a paragraph mark. And this talks about something else, right? Paragraph mark, right? Jesus, this is the testimony of John, right? John bare witness of him and cried, saying, this is he of whom I spake. He that cometh after me is preferred before me. For he was before me, right? So Jesus was before John in his existence. John was born before Jesus, right? 6 months, about 6 months' time, John the Baptist was born before Jesus Christ. So John the Baptist was born before Jesus, but Jesus was before John.
So
he's not talking about a physical thing here. Right? He's talking about the spiritual thing here. John was before Jesus, but again, we know that John the Baptist was born before Jesus, right? This is what we talked about this morning. He was from everlasting to everlasting, right? He came after John in regard to his birth, and after John in regard to his public ministry. Because who started the public ministry before Jesus? John. Why? Because he was the one of the voice crying in the wilderness, pointing to the Messiah, right? We're going to talk about that next week. We're not going to get there. But, all right, verse 16. Verse 16. And of his fullness we have received for grace and grace for grace. Now, we covered this a little bit earlier, full of grace, right? But this verse is a little bit different. This verse is a little bit different. This verse says we received grace for grace. So let's just try to unpack this for a second. There's a grace that brings salvation, right? That's Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 and 9, right? For by grace are you saved through faith, right? That's the Baptist mantra. We know that, right? For by grace you are saved through faith. Through faith. That grace gives us the ability and the proximity to more grace that we would never have had if we had not accepted the saving grace. You hear me all the time. Bring them to the saving grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, right? Because if they don't have that saving grace, they don't have access and proximity to the other graces that we're getting ready to talk about. They just don't have access to it. There are some things that God only affords to his people, and some things that he affords to other people, right? He affords enough grace to the heathen for salvation. That's a massive amount of grace, right? I'm not trying to diminish that. He affords enough grace to the heathen, right? Enough to show them and enough to offer them the salvation, that much grace, right? And then once we get saved, we have so much more grace that we can tap into. Grace is abounding, right? Grace abounds, grace abounds, grace abounds, right? But, right, we are given the ability to access others because we're in proximity to more grace that you would otherwise not have access to. You get grace to get more grace, the saving grace to get access to more grace. Grace for grace, right? Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. We come to the throne of grace because we have salvation. We have that ability, right? We come to that throne so that we can obtain more grace, right? It says so that we could find mercy and get more grace. To what? Help us in our time of need. Grace for grace. So why do we go to the throne of grace? To get mercy, to get grace, right? The grace that brought me salvations brings me to other graces, right? And there are many, many, many other graces in the Bible, right? Many other graces. Of course, we talked about the grace for salvation, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 and 9. There's a grace for service, right? That's Hebrews chapter 12, verse 28. Hebrews 12, 28. Let's go there. We only got a few minutes. Hebrews 12. Hebrews 12. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 28. Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. Lord, give me grace to serve. Right? Give me grace to serve, right? You find that in Hebrews chapter 12. You find that in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 10. Grace for service. 1 Corinthians 15, 10. You have grace for suffering. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 and 10. 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10. Second Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9 and 10. And he says, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in my infirmities, and reproaches, and necessities, and persecutions, and distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. All right, we have grace for suffering. No one wants to suffer. Who here wants to suffer? We want grace in that time, don't we? We want mercy in that time too, but we want grace in that time. No one wants to suffer, but at least those who are saved suffer with grace to help them through some things. Right? If you're saved, you have access to grace that an unsaved individual doesn't. When a saved person loses a loved one and an unsaved person loses a loved one, there's a different process there. We have something we can fall back on. They don't. They don't have anything. They just have questions. All we have is, and we have something there. We have the grace and mercies, especially the graces, right? Only a fool tries to suffer to themselves. A fool tries to suffer to themselves when they have access to grace, right? We have grace to help us. Oh, the Bible says a fool suffers unto his own, right? We partake in the grace. We have the grace for strength. We have the grace for strength. That's 2 Timothy chapter 2. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 1. Grace to be strong. There are times when we feel weak. We need grace for strength. Right? Grace for giving. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Right? Grace for giving. When we went through 2 Corinthians, we covered this. We beat that horse, a long time, right? So you have these graces that are helps in different areas in our life that we have access to that an unsaved person would never have access to. Why? Because the Bible says grace for grace. Right? We come to saving grace so that we can get other graces. Any questions? Dutch?
Very rarely is the word grace used in the Old Testament.
Right.
Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Okay, that describes what
Yep.
God's reaction to Noah was.
Right.
But if you go through the Old Testament and you underline every time it says mercy and truth, you find it over and over and over. I'm talking more than 50 times. And Old Testament, it says mercy, but John sets it up full of grace
And truth.
Grace is all over the New Testament.
Right.
Because in the Old Testament, you needed mercy, and you got it by sacrifice.
Right.
But in the New Testament,
You need grace.
You need grace.
Right.
First of all, you just said it. It's worthwhile looking at the Old Testament and seeing all the times it says mercy and truth.
Absolutely.
And the New Testament explodes
Right.
with something completely different.
Yep.
Don't tell me that men wrote this book.
Yep.
It's impossible.
Yeah, I agree. We'll pick it up in verse 17 next week. Any questions or comments?